So this is the timber that I'm going to make the table out of. It's some beautiful old Oregon. Rough dimensions are about 4 inch by 1 inch. Now it is rough sawn, so obviously it's going to need to be dressed. I intend to dress both faces and both edges. When I'm setting up the table to use the jig, I want to make sure that the jig's always kept against the fence through the whole run. So what I do is I put in a couple of these sticks, and all it is, that's on there quite tight, and then with this second clamp, I pull the stick, not sure if you can see that, I pull the stick back a little bit to put tension on the edge of that jig, and then tighten that up, and I put a second one before the blade. And again, just pull that, give that some tension, and do up the clamp. And you'll see the sticks just flick back a little bit. So that's that tension. That's it. So after using the jig to run a few of these boards through the table saw, probably about a dozen or so, I was watching a video, I think it was of the Wood Whisperer, and he was using a router to surface plane the top of a workbench to flatten it. And I got the idea, maybe I could use the router on the jig, because my router, which is right here, already has this big square aluminium plate bolted to it. And the reason for that is so it fits into my homemade table. And if I pull that out and sit it on top of the jig, it sits there quite comfortably. And because of the size of that plate and because it's made of aluminium, it actually slides quite freely across the top of that jig. And the width of the plate gives it plenty of movement across the jig as well, that way. So I'm thinking to myself, I just need to mount the board inside the jig, slightly lower than the surface, set the depth of the router bit to the lowest point on the board, and I should be able to surface plane the board. I only routed one side of the boards, and that was going to be the side that was going to be the top of the table. The finish that I was getting with on these boards using the jig on the table saw was absolutely fine for the underside of the table. All the pieces have now been milled on one side using the router with the sawmill jig. I've gone around all the pieces and had a bit of a look, and a quick tally of all the thicknesses. That they are of varying thicknesses, but they're fairly close to each other. And I suppose what I'm trying to do is work out one thickness to cut them all to now on the second face. So what I'm going to do, or how I'm going to do that, is I'm actually going to use the same jig. I'm going to fix a block in here. I'll probably screw it to the jig at a predetermined height, and I'll put another block down here. I've got those two blocks set into the jig now. There's one there, they're set at 25 millimeters lower than the top of the jig, so there's just one there, and that's the other one on the slider. So yeah, 25 millimeters from the top, and my jig's exactly 154 millimeters high. So I'll just set the fence on the table saw to 157 millimeters so that we cut all the lengths of board consistently at 28 millimeters. Putting the board into the jig's pretty straightforward, just a matter of sitting that on those blocks and tightening up the jig. Now I use a clamp either side, but I put the clamps on very lightly. That's just to stop the board wanting to rise up in case one of them screw points hits the edge of a grain or a layer of grain. Okay, so the next step for these boards is to trim off one of these edges. I won't use a table saw for that because both edges are still rough sawn, so I don't want to run the risk of it not running true in the table saw. So what I'll do is I'll use the sawmill jig. Once I've got that one flat and square edge to the face, then I can set the table saw up for that one width that every board's going to be, and I can just run the whole lot through the table saw. So until then, we'll use the jig, like I said. I've been obsessing a little bit about manhandling the jig on the table saw, keeping it accurate and true. So probably unnecessarily, but anyway. So what I did, I've just added this extension to the jig now. So what that does, that sits over my fence, and that's going to keep that jig running perfectly true. No chance of me wobbling it a little bit, and it's double-sided, so I can just flip the jig over and do both sides. Okay, so I've already got one board set up in the jig, and I'll just put the other one in. So what I'm doing is I'm just eyeing off the top, trying to take off as little as possible on that first edge, just looking for any gouges or big chunks missing and making sure that I take that off. And that's ready to go through the table saw. All the pieces are now been milled on two sides and one edge, as you can see there. I think there's 56 lengths there all up, so yeah, it's been a bit of a marathon, but really happy with the way they've turned out. The sawmill jig has just been fantastic. So the next step now is to run them all through the table saw to square up that last edge. The boards are all milled now on all four sides. So the next step is to start the glue up. So the challenge with this glue up is that the boards are going to be arranged in sort of a brickwork pattern, such as this. So I can't actually just rush ahead and try and glue as many pieces as I can together each time, because for a number of reasons. If I'm going to glue up in this pattern like this, and just as an example, if I glued what I've got here now together and then came back to it, I've got these gaps in here, and because there's no, once these are glued up, there's no movement in there whatsoever, then I'm trying to squeeze in pieces into these gaps, and that's going to have a problem of its own. First of all, I'll be worried about getting good glue coverage, because trying to squeeze that in, pushing most of that glue out, and not being able to watch the gaps and stuff like that. So that's one reason. And another reason is just because of the sheer number of pieces in this tabletop, and to help align the top, I'm actually going to use biscuit joints. So the biscuit joints are not so much for strength, even though they will help make a stronger joint, but the main reason why I'm going to use biscuit joints is just to help align all these pieces. So because of that, the glue up's going to have to be done in stages, and like I said, it's a bit like brickwork, so I'm going to have to probably start with something like this, and maybe glue together something like that, and then once that's glued up, then I can throw another piece in there. But before I can put another piece up here, I have to include a piece in here, so you can see what I'm getting at. So then you've got to do that, and then I can do this piece here and this piece and so forth. So yeah, so that's the way it's going to have to be. It's going to be a bit of a longer process, but it'll be worth it for me anyway. So yeah, but anyway, what I need to do is stop talking about it and actually get on with it. just taken the clamps off from last night, and I'm really liking the way it's coming together. What I've been really impressed by was actually how straight the table's coming together, even though there's just so many pieces that you put together. So as you can see, I had to eventually move the table outside. It just simply outgrew my workshop. It's all finished now, the glue up anyway, and I'm really happy with how it's turned out. The top of the table only needs finish sanding to receive the whatever stain or lacquer I put on it. It doesn't need any sanding whatsoever to bring the levels, because it is absolutely dead flat. I don't know if you can see up along the table too. The lines are perfectly straight and just looks amazing. I'll obviously just trim off these ends square, so that end there and that end there,